Those who send us to war do not have to pull a trigger or lob a mortar round. They do not have to fight the war, they merely have to sell the war. They need a public who is willing to send their soldiers into harm's way. They need soldiers who are willing to kill and be killed without question. They can spend millions on a single bomb, but that bomb only becomes a weapon when the ranks in the military are willing to follow orders to use it. They can send every last soldier anywhere on earth, but there will only be a war if soldiers are willing to fight.
A lot of people ask me, why don't more soldiers, why don't more Marines stand up and speak out? You know, a lot of folks are simply trying to put their lives back together, for one. And for two, you don't want to go to a place to go kill people and have some of your best friends killed or pick up their body parts or go home and explain to their parents why they don't have a face anymore, why they're gone. The last thing you want to do is come home and come to the realization that that was for the benefit of multinational corporations, global capitalism, banks, geopolitical interests. It's a tough pill to swallow. It is reality, but it is a tough pill to swallow, hence the reason these veterans blow their heads off. The real reason I became opposed to the wars, and the real reason why I continue to speak out if I was getting down to the core of it, is for the people of Iraq and of Afghanistan. And now is, of course, when you first start, it's one thing, you know, it's Iraq. You know, then you learn about American foreign policy, and we can get into that. But I'll speak specifically for the people of Iraq and my personal experience for a little while. That's why I became involved. I became involved not because of what it was doing to American servicemen and women, not because of what it was doing to the American economy, not because of what it was doing to America as on whole. I became involved because of the 250,000 to 1 million Iraqis that are estimated to be dead right now. Because of the 4 to 7 million Iraqis who are displaced, either internally or externally, in a nation of 25 to 30 million people. I became involved because in American society, and I'm assuming it's the same here, they don't put people from Iraq and Afghanistan on TV. It's some white analyst from some college-educated institution or some state apparatus institution, you know, regurgitating talking points. They don't actually talk to the people in Iraq and Afghanistan, and those people are not given a space in this society, and many times not even within anti-war circles, where I often see a lot of white people pontificating about what should happen in the Middle East, yet oh so rare is it to hear from someone from those countries articulating what it is they want in their own countries and for their people.
When I came home, I saw the war through the prism every American sees it through. The television and, of course, radio, talk shows, and I couldn't believe how inaccurate the portrayal of the war was. And at first I was very limited in what I tried to do. I only tried to touch the people that were close to me, but you know, the war went on, and I knew exactly what it was all about. It was the same every day. It didn't change or evolve. It was the way it was. And the more I saw that, the more I believed I had to start speaking out. And one of the things that was so incredible for me is after I had made that decision is when I had come into contact with other veterans who had made similar decisions.
I was getting letters from people saying, you know, we're so proud of you, thank you for what you're doing over there. And then at the same time, I'm looking at people in, you know, at these Iraqi people who I can't even look in the eye because I feel so absurd and so ashamed that we're in their country risking our lives, putting their lives at jeopardy to basically guarantee a profit for Kellogg, Brown and Root.
My father was adamantly opposed to me serving in the military. My father was one of the most warmongering, gun-loving people you could ever meet. But he didn't feel that way when it came to his son because he knew the negative psychological consequences of combat service. Looking back, I know for a fact that my father had post-traumatic stress disorder. He had the rage, he had the nightmares, and he had the flashbacks.
Soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have nothing to gain from this occupation. The vast majority of people living in the U.S. have nothing to gain from this occupation. In fact, not only do we have nothing to gain, but we suffer more because of it. We lose limbs, endure trauma, and give our lives. Our families have to watch flag-draped coffins lowered into the earth. Millions in this country without health care, jobs, or access to education must watch this government squander over $450 million a day on this occupation.
Every one of those guys that I was taking care of told me that they had not made their sacrifice for a good cause. None of them were proud of the fact that they had been wounded for the cause of America. And what they were talking about instead was how they had been fucking over the Vietnamese so badly, and they actually felt guilty, you know. And so the combination of the horror that they were experiencing, you know, and the horror that they had experienced, and that, you know, that made me think, well, gosh, I ought to try and figure out what's going on here, because this ain't what I thought it was going to be. You know, I mean, I was raised in a conservative family, you know, God in America and all that stuff. At any rate, so I decided to look into it. And of course, as soon as I started looking into it, I figured out quick enough that the war was wrong. And so then I started organizing against it as one of the activists within the military.
Here is an FBI notification to the U.S. military in Saigon from 1971. Be careful, Vietnam vets against the war is coming. How fearful are these men with tanks and planes and B-52s? That Vietnam vets against the war sent chills down their spine.
The military really views Iraq veterans against the war as a threat. I mean, we are saying that GIs have an obligation to resist illegal orders, and while that is compliant with international law, the fact is that it's threatening to the U.S. military, because the U.S. military gives illegal orders on a daily basis.
And that was your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I spent the last 9 months of my military career, the last 9 months of 9 years, unexcused absence, UA, or the equivalent to AWOL on active duty, because I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't put on the uniform and pretend that I believed in these things anymore. And so I left, and I still was given an honorable discharge. I'm not exactly sure how that worked out, but basically I left because I couldn't do it anymore. And I knew that what I'd been told was a lie. I knew that I couldn't trust any order given to me without questioning. I stopped thinking like a soldier. And once you stop thinking like a soldier, I think it's your duty to get out, to make sure that you're not put in a situation where you are questioning every order you're given, no matter how insignificant it is, because you've been lied to all the way from the top. From the weapons of mass destruction, we were lied to. From the ties to Al-Qaeda, we were lied to. And we were sent to Iraq on false premise. And how can you ever follow a chain of command that's willing to send you to war based on lies?
What's worse, to die for no reason, or to live a life of violence and destruction, internal structure and hatred every single day for no reason? To live every day knowing that everything that was instilled in me from the moment I was born as a free American boy, all the morals and everything that was taught to me, I gave away at the moment I pulled the trigger for acceptance. The moment that I beat another human being half to death, simply to feel like the heroes that I held with such regard.
I don't have opportunity for cry for my son. I don't have opportunity because the government told me your son died with a shot on the head. It's impossible you see the body. We not pay the funeral for you because you chose the civil cemetery. It's impossible you see the body because the face is destroyed and it's not good for the family. Morley, I understand the military system of the government lied me. My son not died when they received the shot on the head. Jesus died when I stepped the illegal American cluster bomb. I'm waiting for 2 hours for medical assistance and died. He don't have opportunity. I miss my son. I cry every single day for Jesus. It's 5 years. The next 27 is 5 years my son died in Iraq. But when I come in here today with Iraq Veterans Against the War, and I see Camilo, and I see Juan, and I see Jeffer, I see Jesus. This is my new family. This is my voice. My sons and my daughters is here in Iraq Veterans Against the War.
Silver Star, the third highest medal in the country. It doesn't mean anything. Bob Sneal died for these medals. Lieutenant Pomeroy died, so I got a medal. Sergeant John died, so I got a medal. I got a Silver Star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal, 8 Air Medals, National Defense, and the rest of this garbage. It doesn't mean a thing.
I served with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines as an automatic machine gunner. There's a term, once a Marine, always a Marine, but there's also the term, eat the apple, F the Corps. I don't work for you no more.
I publicly wound up refusing my orders to Iraq. I said that I wasn't going to go and that I wasn't going to hide or go to Canada or, I just was going to go back to Brooklyn and I was going to go back to school. And ultimately, I didn't realize at the time, ultimately I would struggle on to become sort of the radical activist or insurgent for peace, even as I call myself today. I said, no, this is not going to be a part of my life. This will not be a part of my history. And after, it must have been actually about 4 months after I was on your program the last time, the military actually finally caught up with me and said, we're charging you with misconduct for refusing to deploy. And I wound up fighting that charge, and they convicted me of it. However, interestingly, that conviction had absolutely no effect on my active duty discharge. It had absolutely no effect on my benefits whatsoever. So
it's like a letter in your file type of thing.
Right, a file that nobody's ever even going to see in the first place, because
a lot of government jobs are like that.
Well, they really managed to keep soldiers in line, keep soldiers coming back for these type of deployments because they have them convinced that there will be consequences. And I thought there would be consequences. I thought, in fact, right after I announced that I wouldn't be deploying in Congress in front of military people, that I would likely be taken away in handcuffs. When that didn't happen, it sort of surprised everybody. And like I said, ultimately we went on to prove that, look, if they call you up, just ignore it. They can't touch you, they can't touch your discharge, they can't touch your benefits, keep going to school, keep enjoying your GI Bill. Whatever you do, don't go to Iraq or Afghanistan. And
yeah, I would have thought that they would have changed you to like a dishonorable discharge or something like that.
No, it's been, geez, nearly 2 years now that I have, since my hearing with the military, and I still attend university using GI Bill benefits. So literally, if there are any soldiers or veterans or anybody out there in the individual Ready Reserve that ever gets called up and they tell you you have to go to Iraq or Afghanistan, just ignore it.
In 1968, October of 1968, I was sent into the Presidio Stockade by the GI movement to organize GIs because a guard had shotgunned and killed one of the prisoners there. In those days, the Presidio of San Francisco was a military base. It was the headquarters for the 6th Army, which is the west coast of the United States. So I went in on a Saturday. I kind of had to wiggle my way into the stockade by refusing to do something nobody had asked me to do. And on Monday we sat down and we sang "We Shall Overcome." I was convicted of mutiny for singing "We Shall Overcome." And the first sentences were 14 and 16 years. I was one of the ringleaders, and those guys that got the 14 and the 16 years were the guys we thought were going to get off easy. Well, a year and a half later, I did find myself walking out of Leavenworth because at a certain point they decided to let all of us go because the political price that they had paid was kind of like the old saying about they picked up a rock only to drop it on their own feet. So at any rate, I was one of the Presidio 27, convicted of mutiny. It's the most serious military crime. Not only are you going up against the brass, but you're doing it in concert with others. And of course, that's what really freaks them out. It's when one guy says no, it's easy enough to deal with. But when you start organizing, boy howdy.
Well, I should introduce a little background, because Mathis is a war resistor, but an interesting war resistor, a war resistor who was in the military and resisted being deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, or the war on terror, whatever you want to call it, while he was actually wearing the uniform, a very courageous thing to do. He attended a protest in Hempstead, Long Island during a debate between the then Democratic and Republican candidates for president really a month before the election, right?
And it was basically to ask them to put the war on the agenda, right?
So we were marching on the last presidential debate to demand that 2 vets be allowed into the debate to ask one question of each candidate, and when we marched to the front gates, we were not allowed to enter, which didn't necessarily surprise us. We were arrested, and then after the main group of veterans arrested, there was 15 in all, I think like 11 veterans and 4 supporters. The police charged horses into the crowd and onto the sidewalk and nearly killed several people. One of a friend of yours even.
Yes.
And that ultimately resulted in actually people who were brutalized by the police being charged with disorderly conduct.
Sure.
Those charges, I believe it was prior to when I was on your show, were dropped by Nassau County, and the young man who was most severely injured, Nick Morgan, who had his skull crushed in essence by a horse hoof, has since been pursuing a civil suit. And even still, we're in this time where everything seems to be so much up in the air. People don't necessarily have a solid sense of what to organize around and how to move the struggle forward, and there's a lot of people coming forward with a lot of different ideas that are heading in a lot of different directions. And there was about, I would say, a group of 5 of us initially who really coalesced around this idea. It wasn't even an idea, it was this drive, this sense of urgency, this responsibility to the people of Iraq and Afghanistan. It was about 5 of us veterans who looked at the situation and said, we can't continue calling Congress, we can't continue trying to pressure Obama, we can't continue standing on sidewalks, holding signs, people are dying. It is not ethical for us as veterans to not be engaged in direct action right now. And so we really wanted to take a step forward with this direct action framework. And in fact, we didn't want to engage necessarily in property destruction. We didn't want to try to stop bullets or bombs from going to Iraq. Well, clearly we would like to stop those things from going to Iraq. We wanted to actually go for the people. And this was one of the very significant things about this event, is this is one of the first times in recent history that you see actually soldiers themselves deploying and having to face veterans blockading the streets to try and stop them. So what we did is we staged a blockade, and we brought 6 buses worth of soldiers heading to Iraq to a halt in the middle of the street.
Wow.
And, you know, we stopped them with banners that said, you know, don't make the same mistake we did, resist now. The situation itself was extremely interesting because we only physically managed to halt the buses, I would say, for half a minute. Because there was a large number of police officers on the scene. They knew we were coming. They had prepared. They had, I would say, at least a platoon of, I only saw male officers out that evening, with dogs and automatic weapons and so on and so forth.
Sure.
The interesting thing is this deployment was originally supposed to happen at 2 in the afternoon, but the group that I'd been working with, Fort Hood Disobeys, we'd been very public about our intentions to block this deployment. People in the unit knew we were coming. People in the command knew we were coming. We were actually calling out individuals in the command by name in front of their soldiers to try and, you know, further drive this wedge between officers and the young men.
You did your
and
homework before you went.
Exactly, exactly. Well, these, you know, are the people who are ordering the lower enlisted soldiers to their deaths. And in many cases, they've been ordered to their deaths before and survived, and they're now being ordered to their deaths again, which was why, you know, we had one of the banners even targeted the unit commander, Colonel Allen, and said, "Colonel Allen, do not deploy wounded soldiers," because unfortunately that is a policy of the U.S. military to deploy wounded soldiers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
People who are still in recovery?
Well, most will be in recovery for the rest of their lives, but individuals with issues ranging from psychiatric issues to serious physical inadequacies as far as the military and conducting war is concerned, being shipped back into the middle of combat time and time and again.